The first thing Solange noticed was the perfume, not the woman wearing it. Not yet. Just the scent. Something expensive, something floral with a bitter green edge, hanging in the air of her own dining room like it had every right to be there. She stood in the doorway, still holding her keys, the smell reaching her before anything else registered. The house was lit up. She could hear voices from the back patio. Broderick's low laugh, the kind she hadn't heard him use with her in over a year. And then the second thing she noticed, 2 champagne flutes on the kitchen counter. Not 1, 2. She had been in Atlanta for 4 days, a training conference her company had sent her to. She had come home 12 hours early because the final session was canceled. She hadn't called ahead. She hadn't thought she needed to. She set her bag down quietly. She did not rush. She had spent 21 years married to Broderick Titus Marsh, and somewhere in those years she had learned that the truth always arrived clearer when you moved slowly toward it. Before we go any further, welcome. If you are new here, this is Folktales, where we tell the stories of real love, real betrayal, and real women who refuse to stay broken. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story. Drop a comment below and tell me, where are you watching from tonight? Let me know you're here. Solange Nzinga Marsh was 51 years old. She had married Broderick at 30, when he was 32, when he was still the kind of man who brought her coffee in bed and called her his quiet storm. She had liked that name then. She was quiet, but she had never confused quiet with weak. She had a master's degree in healthcare administration. She had managed a regional hospital network for 11 years. She had raised 2 daughters, Imara, now 23, and Zola, now 19. While Broderick built his commercial real estate firm from a 2-man operation into a 12-employee company. She had done everything they agreed she would do, and then some. She had not complained when he missed Amara's college graduation because of a deal that couldn't wait. She had not raised her voice when his phone started going to voicemail at 9, 10, 11 at night. She had folded those moments into herself the way women who love deeply sometimes do, quietly, carefully, convinced that patience was the same as strength. It wasn't. She would understand that eventually, but not yet. That lesson was still coming. The back patio of their Lithonia home was large and open. Broderick had built a pergola out there 3 summers ago, strung it with Edison lights, put in a gas fire pit, laid down those large slate tiles Solange had picked out herself from a showroom in Buckhead. She had loved that patio. It had been her idea, her project, her vision of what a home was supposed to feel like in the summer evenings. She reached the glass door before they saw her. The woman was younger, maybe mid-30s, maybe younger than that. She was wearing a short yellow dress and her hair was pressed straight, and she was laughing at something Broderick had just said, her hand on his forearm, her whole body leaned toward him. And then Broderick looked up. He saw Solange through the glass. And he did not pull away. He did not stand up. He did not startle or stammer or move so much as an inch. Instead, and this was the part Solange would replay for weeks afterward, he looked her in the eye, turned slightly toward the woman in the yellow dress, and kissed her on the mouth. Slow, deliberate, like a man making a statement. Solange pushed the door open. The sound of the fire pit, the smell of the perfume mixing with the night air. The woman in the yellow dress pulled back first, blinking, suddenly aware of a presence she hadn't been warned about. Broderick, Solange said. That was all she said. Just his name. The way you say a name when every other word would be too small for what you're carrying. Broderick leaned back in his chair. He crossed one ankle over his knee. A man utterly comfortable in a moment that should have shattered him. You're back early, he said. The session ended. I see. The woman in the yellow dress had gone very still. Up close, she looked younger than Solange first thought, maybe even early 30s. She had good cheekbones and careful makeup and the expression of someone who had not been told enough of the truth to know how to behave in this particular moment. I'm Dasha, the woman said. Her voice was soft, almost apologetic. Solange looked at her for one moment, not with rage, not with tears, and then looked back at Broderick. "I need you to leave," Solange said to him. Broderick smiled. Actually smiled. "Solange, let's not make this into something. I'm not making it into anything." Her voice was completely level. "You have made it into exactly what it is. I need you to leave. This is my house." "It is," she said. "Come Monday, it won't be." She walked back inside. She did not slam the door. She closed it softly behind her, went to the kitchen, poured herself a glass of water, and stood at the counter drinking it in the silence that had always been hers. She had suspected for 8 months. Not imagined. Not feared. Suspected, the way a woman suspects when the evidence is small but consistent, when the pattern of a man's behavior shifts just enough that you'd have to work hard to explain it away. The first shift was the gym. Broderick had never been a gym man. He had a soft middle and he'd always made peace with it. Always said he'd start working out next year. Then last April he joined a fitness studio and started going 4 mornings a week. She had been pleased at first, had told herself it was a health decision. But men who go to the gym for health reasons don't come home smelling like someone else's soap. The second shift was the phone. Not that he hid it dramatically. No sudden password changes. No phone flipped face down. But he started excusing himself from the room when certain calls came in. He started replying to texts with his thumbs moving faster than they needed to for a simple, "okay." The third shift was the most telling. He stopped arguing with her. People who love each other argue. They push back. They negotiate. They care enough to fight. When Broderick stopped pushing back entirely, when he started agreeing to everything she said with a kind of effortless ease, she understood that she had become irrelevant to his interior life. He wasn't keeping the peace because he valued the home. He was keeping it because he no longer needed it to matter. She called her sister Theodora that night. Theodora lived in Memphis, and she was 2 years older, and she had never liked Broderick, not from the very beginning. She had said once, years ago, "Solange, that man respects your competence, but he does not honor your heart." Solange had told her she was being dramatic. She had never forgotten the words. "Dora," she said when her sister picked up. Theodora heard it immediately, the particular flatness in her voice, the one that came not from falling apart, but from holding so still that nothing could shake loose. "Tell me," Theodora said. Solange told her. There was a pause on the line. Then, "How long have you known?" 8 months. "And you didn't." "I needed to be ready." Another pause. "Are you?" Solange looked around the kitchen, the upgraded countertops she had chosen, the pendant lights she had installed herself one weekend while Broderick was in Charlotte, the small framed print above the refrigerator that Amara had painted at 12 years old that said home is where the honest people are. "I was ready before tonight," Solange said. Tonight just confirmed the timeline. She slept in the guest room. She slept surprisingly well. In the morning, Broderick came to the kitchen and made himself coffee and stood there in his robe like nothing had happened. That was his style, the grand reset, the wipe clean. He had done it after other arguments, other disappointments. He was a man who believed that time erased things, that the simple passing of hours neutralized whatever damage had been done. "We should talk," he said. She was already dressed. Navy blazer. Earrings she liked. "Dasha is," he stopped. Started again. "She doesn't mean anything." Solange poured her coffee. "That's a terrible thing to say about someone." He blinked. He hadn't expected that. "I'm serious, Solange. You know how sometimes things—" He made a gesture with his hand that was meant to encompass the vague complexity of human weakness. "Things happen. You know how it goes." "I know how it went," she said. "I want to fix this." She looked at him then. Really looked at him, the way she used to look when he was still the man she was building a life toward. She felt something move through her chest that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite anger. It was closer to clarity, the kind that arrives only after the last remaining hope has quietly closed its eyes. "Broderick," she said, "you kissed that woman in front of me on purpose. That wasn't an accident or a mistake. That was a message. You wanted me to collapse. You wanted to watch it happen. She picked up her coffee. I want you to understand something. That message never landed. I've been 10 steps ahead of you for 8 months. He stared at her. She opened her laptop bag and placed a legal envelope on the kitchen counter. She slid it across to him with 2 fingers, the way you slide a menu to someone who has finally decided what they want. Divorce papers, she said. Signed by me. My attorney's number is on the cover page. She's expecting your lawyer's call by Wednesday. Broderick looked down at the envelope. He looked back up. For the first time in possibly years, she watched something genuine move across his face. Not the cultivated charm, not the smooth reset. Something raw and unprepared. You had these ready, he said. I did. How long? Long enough. She picked up her bag. The girls already know, by the way. I spoke to them both last night. Imara cried. Zola did not. You should probably call them this week. They deserve that from you even if I no longer do. She walked to the door. He didn't follow. She had known he wouldn't. Men like Broderick only pursued what they thought they could still win. She was no longer that. If you're still watching at this point, go ahead and drop the words "she was ready" in the comments. I see every single one of you. Let's see who's been riding with Solange from the start. Keep going, because you haven't heard the full story yet. The next 3 weeks were a kind of weather she hadn't experienced before. Not a storm. She had braced for a storm. She had braced for Broderick showing up at her office, for tearful phone calls at midnight, for the full theater of a man who suddenly values what he chose to discard. Instead it was fog, dense and quiet and disorienting in a way she hadn't anticipated. Broderick moved out quickly, too quickly, which told her that wherever Dasha was living, there was already space being made. He took his clothes, his golf clubs, and the flat screen from the bonus room. He left behind everything Solange had chosen, everything she had built into the bones of that house. She did not know if that was cruelty or indifference. After a while she decided it didn't matter. The distinction was a luxury for people who still needed to understand him. She did not. What she hadn't anticipated was the silence from his family. Broderick's mother, Eulame, had been calling Solange every Sunday for 15 years. Not long calls, 10 minutes, maybe 15, but consistent. Faithful almost. I need you to know that I didn't know. Not for sure. Not until, she stopped. Exhaled. Daddy brought her to Grandma Eula's house. In February. For Sunday dinner. Solange was quiet. He introduced her as a business colleague. Imara's voice tightened. I thought something was off, but I told myself I was imagining it. Zola thought so too, but we agreed not to say anything to you unless we knew for sure, because we didn't want to. She stopped again. We didn't want to hurt you with something that might not be real. Imara. Yes, ma'am. You did not do anything wrong. You hear me? That was not your burden to carry. But I should have. No, Solange said, firmly and without hesitation. You should have been a daughter. That's exactly what you were. None of what your father chose belongs to you. Not one piece of it. There was a long pause on the line. Mama, Imara said finally. Grandma Eula knew. She knew in February. Solange absorbed that. She thought about 15 years of Sunday phone calls. She thought about hospital waiting rooms. She thought about birthday gifts, every single year, without fail. I know, she said softly, because somehow, in the part of her that had always read rooms accurately, she had already known. That was the revelation that didn't arrive like thunder. It arrived like a door closing very softly in an empty house. Eulame had known since February. She had sat across a Sunday dinner table from her son's girlfriend, a woman she had welcomed, while her daughter-in-law was home cooking, working, paying bills, raising their daughters, holding that family structure together with both hands. And she had said nothing. Called every Sunday. Asked after the girls. Said I love you, baby, before hanging up each time. Solange sat with that for 2 days. On the 3rd day, she called Garnet. There's nothing legally actionable about a mother-in-law's silence, she said. I just needed to name it before I let it go. Garnet understood. Naming it first is how you keep it from following you, she said. That's exactly right, Solange said. And she let it go. The deposition happened on a gray Thursday in October. Broderick arrived with his attorney, a tall man named Pruitt who had the practiced calm of someone paid very well to appear unrattled. Broderick himself was dressed sharply. He had lost weight. He looked like a man who had been rehearsing. When Garnett's team laid out the financial documentation, the highlighted transfers, the time-stamped account openings, the investment records, Pruitt's practiced calm developed a small but visible crack. Broderick looked at the papers. Then he looked across the table at Solange. She met his eyes. She did not look away. She did not lean forward. She simply sat with her hands folded on the table in front of her, her expression the same one she had worn in the kitchen that first morning, composed, clear-eyed, already somewhere he could not reach. "Where did she get these?" Broderick said under his breath. It wasn't even a question. It was the sound of a man recalculating everything he had assumed. Garnett answered for Solange without looking up from her own papers. "From the accounts your wife managed and monitored throughout your marriage. They were always hers to access." Broderick turned to Pruitt. Something passed between them, a look that conceded more than either of them wanted to concede. The settlement that followed was not a victory. Solange did not think of it that way. Victory implied a contest, and she had stopped competing long before that room. It was simply fair. The house, her portion of the commercial properties, the retirement accounts, 21 years of invested labor, documented and returned to her in the form that labor deserved. She signed where Garnett indicated. She did not linger. She sold the Lithonia house 4 months later. She had expected that to feel like loss, had prepared herself for grief at the closing table, for a last walk through the rooms where her daughters had grown up, where she had spent 20 years building something she believed in. It did not feel like loss. It felt like setting down a weight she had been carrying so long she had stopped noticing it. She bought a smaller place, a townhouse in a quiet neighborhood in Stone Mountain, with a back deck that caught the afternoon light and a kitchen with a window above the sink that looked out onto a small garden. She planted things that first spring: tomatoes, herbs, a single rose bush that took its time before it bloomed. Theodora drove up from Memphis in May and stayed for a week. They cooked together. They stayed up late talking the way they had as girls, before life had gotten complicated and crowded. One evening they sat on the deck with glasses of wine and watched the sky go through its colors and said nothing for a long time. "You're different," Theodora said eventually. "I know. Not harder. I want to be clear about that. You're not harder." Solange thought about it. "Lighter," she said. "I think the word is lighter." Theodora raised her glass. "To lighter, then. To lighter." Imara and Zola came for Thanksgiving that first year. Just the three of them. The table smaller than it used to be, the house quieter in a way that was new but not unwelcome. Zola, who had always been the more guarded of the two, helped her mother in the kitchen and said almost nothing for the first hour. Then, while they were prepping the greens, she said without looking up, "Mama, were you scared?" "Any of it?" Solange thought about it honestly. "Yes," she said. "I was scared of what I'd find when I looked too closely. That's why it took me 8 months to get ready. But you still looked." "I still looked." Zola was quiet for a moment. Then, "I want to be like that." Solange put down what she was holding and looked at her younger daughter, 19, still becoming, standing in a kitchen that smelled like good food and earned peace. And she felt something move through her that she could not have named before the pain, something that lived on the other side of everything she had survived. "You already are," she said. "That's why you asked." What Solange understood now, in a way she could not have understood before, was that the life she had been living was built around someone else's definition of what she was worth. And she had been too close to it, too inside of it, to see how small that definition had always been. She was not a quiet storm. She never had been. She was simply a woman who had learned that the loudest thing she could ever do was refuse to fall apart for an audience that was waiting. The rose bush bloomed in June. It was a deep, unhurried red. She cut one stem and put it in a small glass on the kitchen windowsill, where the morning light found it first, and stood there with her coffee, looking at the things she had grown from the ground with her own hands. Some women wait for someone to bring them flowers. Solange had learned to grow her own. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe to Morel Folktales for more. New stories drop every day.